So I was told I have 15 minutes. I usually give a talk like this in about an hour. So I kind of Edward Scissorhands my slides. And frankly, I cut some slides that I'm wishing I had. So I might go a little off script, but I'll try to stay on target here. So just in the next 15 minutes, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and unbiased science. And then I'll talk about what I see as the core challenge. And I think it was actually interesting the last talk that we're looking at the same data, but we're obviously walking away from it with very different messages, and that's causing a real crisis in trust and confidence, and the consumers are very understandably confused, right? In my mind, the goal is not to minimize concern, it's to right size it. And I'll talk a little bit about that. The trust gap, why context matters. I like to lead with empathy, evidence, and engagement. And then finally, I'd like to call for collaboration, not competition, no fighting. I think we really all need to come together and unify. And before I go on, I just want to say I heart you to the FDA colleagues in the room right now. Really respect what you're doing now more than ever. So, all right, a little bit about me and unbiased science. So I like to say I'm business in the front, party in the back. So my background, I have a doctorate in public health. My training is in evaluation science, biostatistics, epidemiology. I typically evaluate health programs and policies, state and federal Medicaid expansion, things like that. So that's my consultancies, right? So that's the front of the business, deep data science expertise, and we say that we bring health and science data to life. But what I love and what has become my life's passion is the party in the back there. It's unbiased science in the public eye. So we have an Instagram page, we're on social media, we're delivering infographics on a daily basis. And as you could maybe get a sense from some of the snapshots that I've shared here, I take a little bit more of a playful take to communication, right? Because I like to say that public health science really needs better PR, communication strategies. If the public just wanted the science, they'd read a science textbook, right? But there's a real art and science to science communication. So what is unbiased science? So briefly, we launched in 2020 as a response to the pandemic. I had friends and family members asking me to make sense of science by headline. So I was like, you know what? Let me just create this thing, answers in one place. I thought it would just be my mom and her friends following along, but it has really grown. We have about 600,000 followers across channels. And I just checked Meta last month. We had 14 million views of our content in the last 30 days. So there is a real appetite for science communication. So it's all about sharing evidence-based information presented in an empathetic way. One of my guiding principles, my dad, who has since passed away, he was a lifelong smoker. He didn't have any higher education. We're not even sure he graduated from high school. And I like to think that I'm in the room with my father. How can I speak to him in a way that's going to resonate with a person who doesn't have any formal training in science, is skeptical? How can my messages resonate with him? So I do a little dad test before I publish any content. I lead an incredible team, interdisciplinary team. Like I said, my background's in evaluation science, but we have clinicians and bench scientists, biologists, you name it. So it's a very interdisciplinary team of scientists and graphic designers and communicators. I have no formal training in communication, right? So like so many people, I'm learning by doing. And I've learned a lot over the last 5 years about what hits, what resonates. And so I want to share some key takeaways with you all. One note is that I do think the pandemic has changed everything. So before the pandemic, I might have said, oh, vaccines are safe. But now I have people asking me for data from double-blind placebo-controlled trials, right? So the standard, the level of evidence that we're being held to has really changed. because this gets to be a bit of a heated topic, right? So we all have access to the same data, but we're coming out with different messages. Who has seen the headlines about Girl Scout cookies? Okay. I must have received about 1,000 messages last week alone saying, oh my goodness, are my kids going to die from eating Girl Scout cookies, right? And this was really spurred by this Moms Across America, Danger in the Dough, unveiling the toxic contaminants in Girl Scout cookies. This was a report that was put out in collaboration with GMO Science. So just to give you a sense of how I communicate, those 2 slides on the right are my slides. So I don't know if you could tell, I take a playful approach, like I said, to communication. Toxic Girl Scout cookies, hands off our Thin Mints. Now, if you look all the way on the right, you'll see a hallmark of what I feel is the most critical missing component in the way that we communicate science, and that is contextualization. So yes, there is glyphosate present. If we test Girl Scout cookies, there's going to be glyphosate present, right? But the mere presence of a substance does not indicate harm. And this is a very, very critical concept that I feel is often lost when communicating to the public. So what I did, I have an amazing toxicologist on my team. We crunched some numbers. And yes, a child would have to eat 9,000 Girl Scout cookies to reach that threshold of risk from glyphosate. I love a do-si-do, I love a Thin Mint, but I don't know about you, I can't eat 9,000 in one sitting, right? So that is a very important piece of the puzzle. Who here knows the Food Babe? Does anyone, okay, all right. Who here has been personally affected by information? Okay, I see a hand up in the background. All right, so here's a post that okay, for folks who don't know, the Food Babe is a very, very popular influencer on social media who shares about food, right? She's been present very, at the forefront of the MAHA movement, a lot of the hearings and this and that. So, okay, here's one of the posts that she shared. This was January 2024, a comparison between the US version of Fruit Loops and the Canada version of Fruit Loops. And, very scary sounding things, big red bold font about the dyes that we have present in our Fruit Loops. Oh my God, we're poisoning ourselves. So in just 48 hours, and I'm sure this has climbed to about 100 million at this point, there were 2 million shares. It caused so much panic and anxiety. And I always joke, in the distance, sirens, right? It was very, very dramatic. Everyone was terrified. So jump forward to October 15. This was a protest outside of Kellogg headquarters demanding that we take food dyes out of our Fruit Loops. Why is Canada doing such a better job than the US? It was very, dramatic. It caused a big hoopla. It was all over the news. So what is the anatomy of viral social media content? This is not a post that I did. This is another Food Babe. Post. So some of the elements are emotional triggers, especially fear. This is the #1 driving motivator in these posts. They're trying to get an emotional response, right? Usually very simple, absolute statements. The whole appeal to parental instincts is all over. And I'm a mom, I have 2 young kids, I'd cut off my arm for them, right? So I understand that mama bear instinct. There's an appeal to our desire for control. This idea that, okay, if I avoid this, I'm going to be safer. I'm going to avoid cancer. I'm going to avoid premature death, right? So it's appeal to our desire for control. There's always the appeal to nature, that natural is better, synthetic is bad, anything artificial is not good for us. And certainly not present in this particular post, but the secret truth narrative, that the government or industry is working against us and not telling us something. Okay, so this was my response. This was the unbiased science response to the Food Babe hoopla about Fruit Loops. And I can't look at the text this small. I don't know if you could see it. This is on our unbiased science page if you want to look at it. But what we did was we recreated the post, but you could see on that second slide there, the US version and the Canada version, both safe and tightly regulated ingredients, right? But I didn't just stop there. I wanted to actually break down the science, the different ingredients that people were so concerned about. Why are they there? They must serve a purpose, right? Some preservatives, Why do we have preservatives, right? What is the purpose of these ingredients? And the big thing, and I'll talk more about this in a second, and I definitely hitting my time limit here, so flag me, is that different formulations for different markets, right? So the US and Canada and other countries take a different approach. I know I'm preaching to the choir here. Everyone in the room knows hazard-based approach versus risk-based approach, and I'll talk more about that in a second, right? But this really illustrated a central challenge. We're bridging the gap between public perception and scientific reality. And I think we need to find a middle ground that acknowledges, of course, the mother wants to keep her child safe, right? But what does that look like? What does the science actually say? How much of these things are present in our foods? In what quantities? And how much would my child need to eat to be in any kind of even hypothetical harm? I followed that up, and I just wanted to mention this briefly with 2 deep dives. We also do long form content for folks who want more technical details. So there was one article that we published, food dyes, can't we just get rid of them? Yes, of course we could, right? They're not serving a critical purpose, but should we? And what are the practical implications of that? And then also a deep dive on why different countries make different choices about food safety and why something is, if something is banned in Europe, that doesn't necessarily tell the whole story. Okay. So here I just wanted to illustrate a few more tactics that I take in communication that I have found to be quite powerful. So I like to talk about the risk perception gap. And I'm curious, have folks in the room heard about this concept? Okay, some have, yes. So the public is often more afraid of specific things, certain risks that really in the grand scheme of things are not posing all that much actual risk to us, right? And we're not focusing on the things that absolutely do. So things like overall diet patterns, sedentary lifestyle, preventative health, so on and so forth. But we focus on these food ingredients, food additives that if we removed them, all the data that I've seen, I am not at all convinced it would move the needle in any kind of clinically meaningful way. And I see some nods of agreement in the room. Okay, the next thing is anecdotes are data points. Now, this is tricky because people feel their personal experiences so strongly, right? It's their lived experience, and you never want to come across as invalidating a person's experience. But it is helpful to remind them that your experience or it's an anecdote, it's a singular data point, and evidence it does not make. So I like to think about this example. A friend of mine, he did the keto diet, and he was like, I don't know why you have such a bone to pick with the keto diet. It completely changed my life. That changed my life. The diet changed my life. So I said, okay, all right, Corey, well, tell me more. Did you happen to make any other changes, to your life? So, well, now that you mention it, I started walking, twice a day. And I cut alcohol out of my diet. Yes. So you don't realize it, but these are confounding variables. And that's why we do studies, right? To control for those other factors. And we can't do that with a singular anecdote. Another thing I do is I talk about the different types of studies. So in vitro versus in vivo, preclinical versus clinical. Of course, those studies, those in vitro studies, lab-based studies, preclinical studies, they matter, they serve a very critical purpose, but we cannot assume that they translate to humans. So unless you're a rat, I personally am not convinced of harm if I see a singular rat study that shows that if a rat is, exposed to 5,000 times the amount of a particular ingredient than we as humans would ever realistically be exposed to, that I'm in harm's way, right? So that's an important concept. Another thing is correlation does not equal causation, a concept everyone in this room is very, very familiar with. But look at how I chose to illustrate this. And this was one of our most popular posts. So I used obviously a very playful example. Ice cream causes shark attacks. No, of course not. It's just that in the summer, when it's hot, you're more likely to eat ice cream and you're also more likely to swim in the ocean, right? I also use another shark. I don't know what, I'm very big on the shark analogies, but use that to also illustrate harm versus risk. There's no doubt that a shark is a hazard, right? But unless you're in the water, you're probably not at risk. So there are some very fundamental concepts. I have 1 minute. Sorry, folks. Fundamental concepts that we need to educate the public on. All right, I talked about this. Are foods in other countries actually safer than the US? I would argue no, absolutely not. Here we take a risk-based approach, which takes into account our likelihood of exposure, a very important concept. All right, in, I guess, 30 seconds, the way that I like to communicate is building trust through understanding. So it's about connection, not correction. We heard one of our previous speakers say this. Leading with humanity, understanding, again, going back to the Fruit Loops example, of course, parents are concerned. They're hearing mixed messages that they're poisoning their kids. So let's listen to what their concerns are. Let's not dismiss them or tell them that they're, idiots to be concerned about this. And then really lift the curtain. Lift the hood of the car and talk about the ingredients, the purpose they serve, and how much exposure would actually lead to harm. At the end of the day, I do believe that the EWG and everyone in this room does want to make America healthy again, but we have very different interpretations of what that means and how we go about that. But when the EWG published a study, I forget when it was, I think it was last February, about chlormequat in Cheerios and oatmeal, I swear the amount of phone calls, emails, messages that I got, like, am I poisoning my kid? The same old story. Am I killing my child? I'm throwing out all my Cheerios. Okay. So we did the same exact thing that I showed you with the Girl Scout cookies. We looked at it from a toxicology approach. We did some calculations. So, okay, this is 1,647 boxes of Cheerios, 202 canisters of oatmeal. I mean, I'm hungry, but I'm not eating that much, nor are our children. And so it's risk with context, and people love that context. I already showed you the example on the right, just wanted to show you that I do this with lots of other things, not just foods, also vaccines. So here is my example. There's about 60 times more formaldehyde by weight in a pear than in any vaccine. People appreciate this quantification. Also, people really appreciate a dose of humor. They love a pun. So here, pardon my, crassness, but this was some of our content on raw milk. We tell people not to raw dog it. We use puns like utterly unpasteurized, utterly unsafe. They like this. This captures their attention. When people are consuming information on social media, they want to be educated. They also want a little dose of entertainment, right? You want to have fun. It can't all just be doom scrolling. And then I swear, I'm so sorry. This is the last thing I'll say. The platforms we use dictate our impact. So our largest following is on Instagram because that's where we share infographics. And so that's really where, that type of content shines on Instagram. But it's also dictated by the demographics of the folks who are on those platforms. So younger folks tend to be on Instagram, whereas I find an older demographic on Facebook, also more politically right-leaning. So that's just going to affect the way that we deliver information. Facebook is much less graphic-based. It's much more long-form content. TikTok, of course, you have like 2 seconds to hook people and it's video content. I could talk about this for a long time, but the point is know your audience, who you're trying to target, and that should dictate where you primarily push out your content. And what works on Instagram is not necessarily going to work on Facebook. Okay, last slide. Science without humanity is just a textbook. I love science communication because I'm inserting my personality into it, right? So I would just tell the folks in the room, if you're doing science communication, bring a little joy to the process. Have fun with it. If you're having fun creating the content, your audience is going to have fun consuming it. Thank you all so much. Sorry for the little snafu in the beginning.